Welcome back. So here we are. We're going to go in nav mesh. There's one thing, one set of files the editor doesn't create for you that is missing in order to nav mesh this map. We have everything else set up. Should run in Conquest, should run in... it's a rule of thumb too, is in Conquest it should run as long as you have the valid files available and 2 spawn points. I say safely 2 spawn points for flag minimum and 2 flags minimum opposing teams. So we already set up our strategic areas, which are done right here, which was our neighboring that we'd done, our order positions that are valid. And then we also set up our combat area and the gameplay objects. That's all that business we did earlier. And this has to be there. If for whatever reason you screw up, but you did it in an anti-clockwise fashion like you're supposed to, you could find another map with its combat area and just copy and paste this code in, and you could nav mesh it. You just got to make sure that it was placed anti-clockwise to begin with. So you wouldn't have had to go back in the editor and find that stupid command. You could have just added it manually, but all intents and purposes, it's good to know. So this map is ready to be set up for nav meshing. The only thing it's missing is the AI folder within the map. We need one of those. There's an AI folder that goes with your game modes. All that is the strategic areas. That has no bearing on the nav mesh control. The AI folder that resides in the map level would be the one that we don't have. The editor doesn't make it. You gotta grab it from another map. It's stupid, but whatever. So I'm gonna borrow the one from this map. Copy. And paste it in there. There we go. So now we have it ready to basically set the controls for nav meshing. And remember what I was talking about, the clusters. If you have vehicles in the map that run off the ground clusters, you have to have the ones that you intend to have in that map ever. So if you decide, oh, I'm just going to make a quick version of this map and put tanks in, and that's it, you could run it with just the tank clusters and it would work fine. But the moment you try to put something that's using the armed car or landing craft AI behavior, cluster behaviors, they won't use them. They won't drive them. They won't do anything with them. So it's always best to have the basics of what you have in your game or mod in there. And this is important enough. I think I should explain to you what those are and where they are, so you know what you have in your mod if you're running your own mod. So AI, where is it? Behaviors. So in your mods folder, AI folder, you'll see this kind of crap, right? You see this AI set vehicle for cluster mapping. If you look closely, you'll notice there's lots of different behaviors tied. The first one is the behavior type. The second one is the clusters, the cluster cost types. We have tank, landing craft, infantry, and armed car. Okay, in our game, everything is tied to one of these. So we've got a few others in there, but they're associated with the clusters on the nav mesh. There's only 3 of them. You can add or remove those. You can do what you want with it. But, like for instance, in 2142, all they have is tank for everything. They don't have anything else. So it's just something to note that when you're going to generate a mesh and it's a big map and a lot of crap and stuff like that, if you don't have this set up right, when you get done, you may end up having to do it again. And you don't want to do that. It's time consuming. Alright, so that's a brief overview of what and why and how that works and why it's important. So you need all this code basically. These slopes determine the cutoff of the nav mesh. Too high a slope in really mountainous maps and stuff might give you a lot of excess mesh that isn't necessary. So it's kind of a, you got to try it out and see how you come out. Alright. Best bet Best bet is if you don't know what value to use, base it off the settings off of an original vanilla map, okay? Most of them have the slope values in it. I know from experience this is too high generally, unless you've got stairwells and custom objects that won't mesh because their slopes are too steep. All intents and purposes, probably 35 to 38 for infantry would be plenty as a baseline. At 28 to 32 is probably plenty for vehicle. But you have to kind of adjust those numbers as needed based on how the mesh comes out. It's not really any magic to it. Now this map radius is the brush size of the nav mesh. That means how tightly you can adjust the tightness of the mesh to the objects, right? And you'll notice that's why vehicle is like set to like 3 meters, and this one's only 0.19. Well, you don't want a tank where meshing it where a bot would try to fit a tank down an alleyway that's like half the size, right? So this basically cuts off the mesh, where it shouldn't go for something of the size of a vehicle. And usually you would base that off your largest ground vehicle as far as width. So 3 meters, whatever. We don't have any vehicles in there. We don't have to be too particular with this one because it's going to be an aerial ground, run around on the ground type map rather than having any tanks, jeeps, any of that sort of thing. But just bear in mind that's what these controls are for, so you can adjust them. Stock numbers, which I'm going to put in this map, is 3.5 for vehicle, because tanks are around that as far as their width, value wise. And then I believe it's 25.25 is stock settings for the nav mesh radius for infantry. With that said, everything else can be left as is. Doesn't hurt to add these clusters even if you don't have those vehicles in it, just because if in the future you wanted to test something, throw it in there and try it, you could. Save, close. There we go. So that said, that's all done. This map is pretty much officially ready to nav mesh. So what I'm going to do is show you how to start and initiate that. So in Nations at War, I'm doing this in Nations at War. So you got to find the nav mesh folder. Okay. Let me back up once. I want the name of the level. I'm going to copy the name of this level. So rename, copy. Okay. Then we can go back to the nav mesh folder. There should be a work folder in there. Open a work folder, and you'll notice I got a ton of different nav mesh folders in here, but you're going to create a new folder, okay? And you're going to name it that map. Paste. There we go. Then what you'd like to do is go back to the nav mesh directory, and you'll find this create nav mesh batch file. Okay. And before you even run this thing, make sure that you have the latest Python 2.7.xx, whatever the latest Python script is. Make sure that environment is installed in your computer. You can get that on the Python website. Just make sure you don't get the 3 point or whatever it is. You want 2.7 point. Like I think I'm running 2.7.12 Python environment. If you don't, these will not run. Okay. So anyways, run this batch and it'll pop up the mod name. So whatever your mod is, so ours is NAW. And then your level name, just paste it in from what you copied. These have to be caps matters. It has to be perfectly exactly the same as the app name. Then click start. When it starts, this window, save it, and I'm going to move that out of the way until this loads. There we go. It's going to automate the editor to open up and do some stuff and then close. If you have any issues, this thing will report it or it'll crash out, one of the two. If you've got a problem, you missed a step or something went crazy, this thing will get pissed off and tell you about it. Generally. what it's doing is just loading single player level editor and exporting the GTS meshes. GTS meshes are basically a copy of a model of all the objects that are in the map. And with that, I mean static objects, trees, that sort of thing. Gameplay objects are counted as key points to the nav mesh. Lets it know, okay, there's a vehicle here, there's a spawn point here. We really need to pay attention to the meshing in that area. That's all they are. But all of your static objects and things that bots could bump into or whatever, it creates like a mini OBJ files of those models, so it knows what it can and can't nav mesh and what it needs to nav mesh around and all that crap. So that's why that's pulling that data or exporting all that data out to the navgen. And a simple test map like this should not take very long at all. As a matter of fact, I might be able to continue recording. You get into a map of 2048 in size that has a full load of buildings and everything else, and vegetation and trees and crap everywhere. It could take anywhere from a day to even a day and a half to just try to get it to finish nav meshing. So it's very dependent on how complicated the map is, the terrain, how curvy and bouncy and bumpy and this and that, and that adds a whole nother flavor of problems that you might have to encounter and fix in like 3ds Max or some sort of some way of nav mesh editing. No key points defined for vehicle. You see that error? That's because we have no vehicles out there. Planes and helicopters don't count as vehicles to the navgen because they don't use the nav mesh to pathfind. They use what's called an aerial height map. So it's upset because it doesn't have those, because it doesn't have any key points and whatnot. What should have been done is anytime you do these maps, we probably should put something in there like a car or a truck, and just anything just to make it happy. And you can always remove them after the fact. But we'll see how this goes. But see, now you can see that it had exported that one little rock. So it knows that that rock exists. So it's going to probably try to, oh, there's a rock here. I need to nav mesh around that, It takes a while to optimize as well, but what it'll do is it'll go through two stages basically. It goes through this optimization thing, and that's basically crunching away numbers and trying to develop some plan of nav meshing this thing apparently. Then it'll go to what's called expanding faces, and it'll do whatever magic it's doing there, which I have no idea what these exactly mean, and then it goes to shrinking mesh. After the shrinking mesh stage, it's pretty much done with that part of the mesh, which whether it's infantry or it's vehicle that it's working on. And during those points, you can see certain errors pop up and whatnot in here. A lot of it's kind of normal to see. It tries to self-correct. I mean, it's an automated meshing program, so obviously it's going to run into things, and then it goes, oh, I got to try with a different blah blah, a different method, and then it goes through it again, and eventually it should get through it. It takes a good 3-4 minutes for it to optimize on a small map, so hopefully it'll get going here. But this is a perfect thing for an example for you to see what all the stages are in the actual nav mesh program to get some familiarization with what to expect. When it completes, it will relaunch the editor and it will save what's known as quad trees. And what that does is it converts the two, there's an infantry OBJ. I might as well show you that while this thing's. So I've got some that have been previously generated in here, and it'll give you an idea of what is created in the folder, in the work folder. So it's a GTS data folder that houses all these. In the output, this is your actual physical nav mesh. So you got an OBJ file for infantry, and you got an OBJ file for vehicle, right? Those two house all the coordinate data for the entire mesh. All right. The rest of these files make up some of the data that makes up that, but I think that has to do with how it assigns those clusters that I was talking about. This cluster folder won't have anything in it. I think it's a temp folder of some sort. Meshes, this is the export GTS data step that it does when it first initiates and launches the editor. This is where all those are stored. And these are GTS files, right? It uses the data in those to create objects, which you will see in, like, say if you have an issue with an object, it'll throw it in at self-intersecting, and notice there's whatever this was at that time had a call 3 issue, and that's part of the model that allows it to nav mesh correctly. And if it's not modeled right or has errors or is non-existent, it will end up in this folder, and it'll say, I can't nav mesh that thing, so I'm going to just use its bounding box and nav mesh around it. All your objects by name and number are here, and it will show you all the different objects and stuff that you have in the map. Like, for instance, this map had a shitload of stuff, you know, lots of different components or bits and pieces of the same object all over the place. Every individual object is in here. Islands is critical. When the nav mesh finishes, you may notice either you don't get a mesh in the editor when you go in, when you try to render it, or you do, but the map crashes a lot, and you run debugger on it, and you find, oh, I've got islands. That's what this is referring to. So when you go in here, it'll list all the islands that are for vehicle and infantry. If you have a perfect mesh and it did what it was supposed to do with no problems or errors or glitches, you should have only one island per type. So you should have one island in infantry and one island in vehicle. So if I open this up, you notice that there's a whole bunch of them. All right, these big ones, these were probably previous iterations. If you looked at the dates, modified, you know, it's what you would typically see is, say, ignore these 3 down here, but these top, you'd see, oh, I've got 3 islands. Well, you probably got a floater of mesh that's not attached to the main mesh. So all intents and purposes, if you don't have a 3D editor, you could potentially fix that mesh by taking this one, pulling it out, copy it to desktop, rename it to infantry, and then replace the infantry OBJ and run fix nav mesh. You could do that for vehicle as well. This is how a good one should look. It should just have one island. That is it. It didn't have any errors. It's good. No floaters, nothing. So this is just a brief description of like where to look after you mesh it and you have an issue. This debug folder is like gold as far as information. The rest of the stuff is probably more advanced and not necessary to go over, but these key points, this is what it generates. So for instance, in this map, let me show you what it's got in it, just because these are temp files generally. Space locators. And you'll see that there's a space locator for every spawn point and every object spawner in the map. It basically just tells it that it's a point of interest. Okay, so anything else, there's log files. So if you're looking for a particular issue, you might be able to find it in here. For instance, this just goes so far. And if you were to look at the nav mesh control, you know, they're dated, some of these. Your logs might be different than some of mine, whatever. But it's just information. See, these, yeah, it started finally. So now it's shrinking mesh and it's whipping through it because there's not really much in it. These Boolean errors are some sort of, it finally came to a point where it couldn't continue. and it realizes, okay, I need to change my method, and it changes its method and continues on and tries to beat whatever the problem is. It's just mathematically trying to solve its own, getting backed into a corner when it's trying to create the mesh. Nothing to worry about. As long as the mesh generates correctly, you're fine. So that's an overview of the work folder contents, so that you have an idea of what to look at when you get done. If you happen to have any strange errors or issues, or it's not generating or whatever. So people like me that have done it a million times and ask you, well, what's in your debug log? Well, you can kind of look at it and you can kind of figure out, okay, what might be going on with it. Now, not to get too far ahead of myself, but once this completes, we'll check it, and like I said, we're going to check it for islands. That's the biggest thing to check for. Before you even fucking open it in the editor, there ain't no freaking point until you know that there's no islands. Because if there is, we're going to get rid of those islands, or we're going to attach them to the main mesh like they should be, and then save those in max, and then run fix nav mesh on the whole lot. Once we got no islands, then you can open in the editor, and you can try and test play it in the game. So, and fix nav mesh runs about the same way as what create nav mesh does, but what it does is the edited meshes it reconverts back to what the game wants to see is what it is. So while this is crunching along, I kind of want you to be able to see the process here, so I don't want to open max, but this will be done in a second. I would like to go over a little bit at some point based on, even if this one's good, I might open an old mesh of mine to show you some of the things and pitfalls that you can have when you're trying to edit these things. They're edited as OBJs and they're exported back as OBJs. So that part's pretty simple. It's just a matter of knowing what rules you have to follow when you're fixing or welding or, and ways to check the mesh with STL. All in all, it sounds really complicated. It's really not. But all right, so now it just completed. So now it's launching the editor, and it's going to do its business and trying to convert this to an appropriate game-ready pathfinding. And what you can do is scroll back up through this, and you'll see that this completed, and you'll notice, hey, see this? Saving file, island 0 and island 1. We got islands. So I got to take a look at that, which is good because you're going to get some experience in how these nav meshes are fixed. I'm not sure if that happened with infantry or not, but we'll find out. But anyway, as I said, there's no point in even bothering with this editor once it's, when you got islands, you're screwed. So we got to fix it. What we'll do is we'll just go to Task Manager. I'm going to kill this sumbitch. There's no point in even letting it do what it's doing. So we know we've got problems. So we open up this work folder in NavMesh that we created, GTS data, debug, and let's go to islands. So there's one island. We should not have this little piece of mesh. Apparently something got goofed. And then infantry. Infantry's good. We should be okay with that. So what I'm going to do is, now that we know what we have for islands, I'm just going to go to the output folder and we're going to open up. And you may want to make a backup of this if it was a long, complicated mesh. If you screw up in Max, you'll ruin the original. I'm not going to do that because it's a really simple one. It doesn't take long to mesh. So all we need to do is open up vehicle. The one here will have both islands in it. And all we need to do is get rid of that little tiny bit that's 1 kilobyte. It's likely some rogue poly that isn't connected to the main mesh. So this is perfect. This worked out well because now you're seeing every aspect of it. How to repair it. What to look for. Alright, so import. These settings. you may want to look at and make sure that you have the same. It's pretty particular with it. But anyways, import as a single mesh is important, and so is flip XZY axis. That needs to be that way, along with textual coordinates. Import materials, leave prefix out of it. You don't need it. And neither of these two should be checked. The way this is set up should work for you. This is to max 2009. I don't know about your max, but if you use a 2009, these are the settings. Import. Alright, so now we've got our mesh. Alright. I like perspective view and mesh editing. Views. Go to viewport. Edge faces. So you can see what exactly is going on in this mesh. Alright, so here we go. Now, looking at this mesh, there ain't nothing wrong in the middle. I will guarantee you it's somewhere on the edge. You got some sort of flip poly or something over top, or it's not even attached. Who knows? So the easiest way to try to look for rogue polys that are, or islands, is select by element, select the whole thing, hide it, and then take your cursor. I can see it right now, but what I do is I will just make sure that I've got everything, and that's the one right there. So then I can unhide all and take a look and find out where that is. Aha. That little booger. So there's some tiny little freaking rogue poly just floating off in its own space. I don't know why. Like I say, that program is only as good as it is, and it tries to eliminate and fix everything. It doesn't. Since this one is not important and unnecessary, all you need to do is delete the damn thing. Done. So with that said, now we need to make sure that we have our materials picked. And since this has no water in it and no deep water, we're only going to get ground, right? So once that's done, all you need to do is export. Select GWLBJ exporter. Navigate to your work folder output. So Nations of War, nav mesh work, and we're going to go down to IBTAI, GTS data output, and we have vehicle that we're working on. Select vehicle, save. It'll ask yes. Export. Export settings should be the same as your import settings. Actually, I'll just in case you want to take note of that and compare it, I'll do it again. Yeah. So you want all this shit checked. Just everything exactly the same as what I have is fine. It's always worked for me, so I'm going to cancel that. So we've done that. We can close Max, because that was the only mesh we needed to repair. Anything bad polys, floating polys, islands, such edges sharing more than one face, any of that stuff is a no-go. It's got to be a good, clean mesh. Anyway, moving on. So we exported this. Now it's larger in size, right? What we do want to do is edit with a notepad editor of your own favorite notepad editor, and when it comes out of Max, it's going to call it by the name of the file. You want to put it back to materials.mtl, because the materials that the game engine generally uses is this one here. So you save that, make sure it's spelled right, save that, go to it. Alright, so now we're ready to run fix nav mesh. So then you go back. Now that we've edited it, we need to run it and get it in the editor. So we run fix nav mesh, but I need to again copy the name of the, I'm going to copy the name of the map. I like doing that because I'm lazy and I don't like to type. Okay, fix nav mesh mods, so gnaw, and paste, and run it. Keep an eye on this. This file will give you any errors that it might find again. I've had it do that. Like for instance, vehicles still got some issues. It's saying an edge is used by more than 2 faces. That means we've got one that's kind of goofy in that still. So you might as well stop it. We'll take a check in STL check in Max. This is the kind of stuff that you typically will run into, and you need to know how to fix it, because if you can't, you're screwed. So what we're gonna do is go back in our work folder, open that up again, and I'm gonna do an STL check on it, and it'll probably tell us where and why. So we go into, where is it? Right there. Output, vehicle, get it back in Max. I'll show you a real easy way of trying to hunt down these bad polys. Alright, so we re-import it, get it in, go back to views, whoops. Alright, what I do, and I would suggest you use this method too, because it just takes a little bit of the time out of it. Add a modifier, STL check, okay? Important, uncheck that box. Don't apply materials to the bad polys, because it can fuck you. Leave this on everything and select faces, and then run your check. And now we've got our errors. We got 22 multiple edges, 3 spikes, and 16 double faces. So, first things first, I'm going to collapse this modifier. Yes. And then I'm going to go like that. And that'll select one of the bad polys. Alright. And what it is, by the looks of it, is just because this is so tight, there's probably overlapping or polys cutting themselves up. So what we want to do is try to zoom in on that area and find out where exactly that thing is, so that we know whether it's safe to delete without breaking the mesh. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, since those aren't all that necessary, I'm going to get rid of them. Okay? And there's probably more in there. You see that one's folded. You can almost tell just by how it looks. And I'm going to get right down into the brass tacks of it and make sure if the dog quits doing that to me. Stop. Yeah, see, this poly doesn't look right either. So we're just going to clean it up a little bit. Get rid of this one. That one's probably unnecessary. And so is that one. There we go. Alright, so now we're going to do the repeat and rinse. We're going to grab it again. Try to get this thing clean. That way we don't have to go in here again. STL check. Okay. Uncheck the material ID. If you don't, you'll screw it up. Especially if you've got multi-materials in your mesh. So then we rerun this thing. Alright, we still got 9, 1, and 6. I'll bet you dollars to donuts this one's probably going to remove more. So I'm going to end up collapsing this. Collapse all. Yes. And now we've found that one. And again, it's on the edges because the way it shrinks, sometimes it screws up. And that one's nasty. Holy moly. That is some small sliver polys down there. That's why it's screwing up. Alright. So I'm going to get rid of that one. I'll worry about the cleanup in a minute. Zoom in a little tighter if I can. It gets a little touchy when you get in that close, but you'll see those two right there are offending polys. That ain't right. So we're going to get rid of them. They're gone. There. Then we're going to do it one more time. And hopefully we'll get a nice clean mesh. And we won't have to fuck around. Uncheck material ID. Important. Check. You got 4 multiple edges. 1 spike still. And 2 double faces. It doesn't matter. You just pick whatever you think is causing it, and then you just got to keep going back and checking it until you get a clean mesh. So I'm gonna Where is it? Collapse all. Back to the mesh. And, yep, there's more in there in that area. No surprise. So, zoom in on that. Sorry, my headset quit again. There we go. Yeah, there's one there. So that guy's got to go. That guy's got to go. So in this case, because those are the way they are, what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld that back up. So first thing, I don't want that stretching the way it's going to stretch. But I do want to grab this as a vertex here and shimmy him on down here. And we're going to just zap that guy. I generally set my weld threshold pretty high. That way I don't have to worry about it if I'm a little close or a little off. It doesn't matter. Alright, so now what we're going to do, grab the whole thing again, repeat and rinse, see if that didn't help. You could do this multiple times. Sometimes the first one you fix and that was all it was. You know, it's just part of the nature of this crap. Nothing's ever easy. No errors. No errors. No errors. So that one little bastard was causing like multiple different errors in these. You don't have to worry about open edges and nav meshing, but you do have to worry about any of these other three. So it appears we're good. So I'm going to delete this modifier since I don't need it. And we're going to re-export this one. So make sure our materials, I always pick them just in case. There we go. File, export. And we're going back to the same folder. I'll navigate back to Nations of War work. Or wherever your work folder resides. Or NavMesh folder resides. And vehicle. Save it. Export it. And we just try again. Close this. Nah, we don't need to save. Go away. Alright, so now we're going to go back to NavMesh. Fix NavMesh. And gnaw. And hopefully I have it still pastable. Yep. And then we can watch this and see if it got any better. I'll wait until this editor comes up. There we go. Alright, so then I scroll back through and I check it again before I even bother. Infantry looks good. There's one island. There's no reporting of any sort of poly errors. There are no key points for vehicle, but we don't have vehicles in there. If you put vehicles in there, that error will go away. But we don't need them because we don't have any in there. So, and then we've got, yeah. So there's no bitches now. That mesh is acceptable. If we want to fix this, what we could do is add a few vehicles in the map to get rid of that key points problem. Just put 2, you know, or 1 even on one side, and it'll accept that as a key point, you know. But all intents and purposes, this will work for aircraft. So don't close that window. It'll close itself when it's finished. I'm going to move it out of the way though, because there's nothing more to see on it. So now it's going to load up. It's going to run a command in there, basically that tells it to save quad trees, and then it'll end up closing. While it's saving those, you want to pay attention to any errors that might pop up in the you know, where my cursor is, the log area. If you don't get any errors, it just pauses for a long time and then closes. You should be good to go. If you get errors, it could be a problem. But one of the big things that happens is on a big complicated map, you may see that it'll say, what is it called? It says polygons is suspiciously big, and it'll say cluster errors, and it just scrolls a bunch of red errors. What that normally is it's either a faulty mesh, or what most of the case is usually over the poly limit. It can't process it. It can't save it correctly, which then you may or may not be able to play that map well, and the bots may or may not act retarded, or you may even end up with some random crashes. So that saved pretty nicely. Get down. Come on. So now we should, in theory, if we've got appropriate teams in the map, we should be able to just run this thing. So let's run it and see if it runs. Forgive me for rambling on, but I'm trying to get all this information in to whoever's wanting to see this. One thing to note, if you have a more complicated map, I would suggest opening in the editor first and checking and making sure all of your vehicles' spawn points are actually on the mesh. Because if it meshed in areas and you happen to put them too close to buildings or something of that nature, you could have a spawn point or vehicle off the nav mesh and not realize it. And it may run until that bot decides to spawn into that spot, which those errors are kind of annoying because they can be kind of tough to track. Okay, so where did that go? Right there. So we're gonna just pick the 64. Who cares? So we're going to load her up and see if she runs, and if she runs, great. And then the last thing I'll show you is some tips and tricks and things with AI to remember. Once you've generated a good mesh and you've played it and it works and whatever, you still want to just go open it up and visually check that all your infantry order positions, all your spawn points, and all your object spawners are on the mesh appropriately. Come on, Pokey. Alright, here we go. Now, John specifically, you'll need to change the teams in the init.conf, and you'll need to change the vehicles to whatever's in your mod. But this map, in theory, I should be able to zip it up and send it to you, and you can utilize it for your purposes. The other thing you want to make sure is that you have the same detail layers that I have in your common folder, texture, terrain textures. Or you might, yeah, you'd want to have them. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to save our color maps and detail maps, so this isn't going to look right. So, let's just see if we can spawn. See if he gets pissed off. If we can spawn, I know it's good. It's just, I got to do something in the editor, which I've got to open up anyway, so. Alright. There's our base up there in the corner. Alright. And there we go. We got bots running around. Yay! And he's taking off in the aircraft. Isn't that nice? So, it worked. But I did forget something. That's why the terrain's black. So, we'll open it up in the editor and get that sorted. But basically, we T-painted that map, but we never added the files. We never saved the files across. So we put them in there. They show up in the editor, but they won't show up in game until you actually save them across in the editor, and I'll show you how to do that. Lots of things to remember when you're doing this. So you get a couple under your belt and you're doing them consistently, it's easy. You get used to it. if you get away from it for a while, it's kind of like riding a bike. You know the general stuff, but you always forget something. And that's one of them. I forgot. But worst case, use the video, take some notes. You know, if you have a notepad there, whenever you're working on a map, you can make a checklist of all the shit that you need to remember to check and do, and it'll help. But having a video like this definitely is helpful, especially if somebody forgets stuff and remember, knowing how to fix your screw ups is probably one of the most beneficial things that you can have. No matter how good you are, you're going to screw up. Alrighty, now we get this loaded. Come on, biatch. Today. Come on, Gertrude. Get loaded. I freaking hate the editor. I always have. Come on. There we go. Load that. Let's see. Right there. Here comes the IBT map. Alright, so what I had forgotten, and some of the other tips. So, we get this map up. We're going to want to render our AI for sure. This way it'll highlight and spot things that we wouldn't ordinarily see in game ever. So, one of the first things you want to do is check every one of these spawners. So you got this guy's green, this guy's green. If they're wrong or if they're off the mesh or there's a problem, they'll be red. Same thing with your infantry and vehicle order positions. They should be green. If they're red at all, they're invalid. It will cause problems, random crashes, other types of things. Depends on what the bots decide to do. So this team side is good. And then we can go over here. Takes forever to get across the big maps. Alright. And these guys are green. And sometimes you gotta really dig to look, but that's alright. One thing you can do too with statics is turn statics off, and it'll give you a better visual, but turn them back on when you go to try to select something so you don't accidentally move an object you didn't want to. Alright, so all those are good. What we failed to do earlier on, or I failed to do earlier on, is in the terrain editor I forgot to actually force it to save those T-paint textures and stuff. So what we'll want to do is go back in here, go to resave, okay? So after you've T-painted and opened it in the editor and it looks like it's supposed to, you need to go in and check these boxes. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this guy. Those there will get you all the files into the playable files of the map. Never mind the editor. This is stupid reshades doing goofy shit when it saves. So in theory, now, if we go back to our map files, you'll notice that levels, IBT, AI, you're going to notice that we're getting color maps now in here. Before they weren't. They were default. That's why they were black. See, it's writing them now in the detail maps. There we go. And we don't need that anymore. So we'll just minimize it. And one last thing after it gets done saving is we'll just make sure that set little detail is actually applied. And it should be fine. Alright, so it's saved. What I want to do is while I'm in Terrain Editor, I want to go back to here. Well, actually, hang on. Let's just verify that it's right. I'll go to render and just check detail texture and make sure the detail texture does exist. If it does, you shouldn't have to do this, but in the event that you've forgotten, it would probably show you anyway, I guess, now that I think about it. So, but detail texture mode, yes, it's there. So if you zoom in on it, you'll see that it's got the appropriate detail texture. The only other thing that could probably be done on this is change the tiling. So if we were to say go, I don't know, on grassy here, set the top tiling to something like 84, and save that. And then set the top tiling for dirty to about 84 as well, because most of our textures are set to be pretty detailed. Save. Okay. Yeah, now it's a little bit more lifelike size anyway. But anyways, whatever. You just do that. File save. Or resave, sorry. And with that, you may want to set it in compiled terrain. Terrain. Ground properties. If in doubt, you could save everything all over again. It doesn't really matter. The only thing, you just don't want to mess around with any of these extraneous things unless you've actually modified something in them. That's all. And there we go. We're going to save it, and then we'll reopen it and see if it looks okay. And if it does, we're good. And then I will send this map to you, John. Just takes donkey's years to save, but never mind. I can't seem to think of anything else off the top of my head, but I'm sure eventually you'll have questions or something, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess. There's lots of ways to make these things prettier and, you know, get the tiling and such right and whatever, but one thing to note is because of the detail layers that I selected, you'll need probably at least those detail textures in your game or mod so that they exist, you know. But you can get them out of GNOW anyway. Okay, so we're done with that. So now, in theory, I should be able to launch it and play it. And then, if you want, you can go in and pack the map once it's a final test map for yourself. I think I'll send it to you unpacked. That way you can go in and modify stuff. You know, I'll just zip up the unpacked version with all the editor files and it's tacked. That way, anytime you want to rerun it, renav mesh, do something to it, you'll have the all the originals so that you can actually do so without fudging it up or having to recreate anything. If nothing else, it'll be a good model map that you can use for, you know, troubleshooting, trying to figure out why another test map you made doesn't work, or even just regular maps that don't work. You have a comparison, you know, something to go off of. Oh, let's get that in there. Alright. Here we go. And I'll let you do your info folder and, you know, the mini map and all the other bullshit that you may or may not want in there. Mini maps aren't hard to make. I don't know if you've done them or not, but I'll try to generate one before I go, but I just wanted to finish the video with it actually running so you could see how it worked. Sorry it's long. It's like an hour long, but packed with a lot of info. So come on, Pokey, get to loading. Okay, and the sun's out. It's nice out. Okay, here we go. Have to run around like a rape date. Alright. Join battle. Tiley as hell. Ugly as shit. But that's okay, because we don't care, because they're just going to be beating up airplanes in it. So. I'll leave it up to you to beautify it if you so desire, but at least it'll get the job done for you. Alright, so, here we go. Got little bots and bastards running all over the place. One is actually in a jet. Oh, he just ran my ass over. What a dick. So, as you can see, runs like a chop. There you go. Mission accomplished. Alright, buddy. I will talk to you soon. Good luck.